So, hello and welcome back to another episode of Doctor Who. Journey to the Center of the Earth. I really am getting strong Doctor Who vibes off this, and I wonder if, maybe Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat read a lot of Jules Verne as a kid. I don't know. It's probably just my silly brain relating this to something that I've been getting into again lately. But yeah, I'm getting some very, very cool adventure vibes. I guess if I were a kid of like previous times, I would just say that this reminded me of 50s sci-fi movies, etc. and so on. And that's probably because so much of it was influenced by this book. And that's really cool. The thing I didn't expect from this was that the humor in it would actually hit my modern brain and make me go, that's actually really funny. I'm I'm really enjoying this, and I hope that you are too. So, we're going to jump back in and read another couple chapters of Journey to the Center of the Earth by Mr. Jules Verne, and we are beginning with chapter 5. If I can ever get my glasses out of my glasses case. I had only just time to replace the unfortunate document back onto the table. Professor Lindenbach seemed to be greatly abstracted. His main concern gave him no rest. Evidently, he had gone deeply into the matter, analytically and with profound scrutiny. He had brought all the resources of his mind to bear on it during his walk, and he had come back to try out some new combinations. He sat in the armchair, and pen in hand, he began with what looked very much like algebraic calculation. I followed his trembling hand with my eyes. Not one of his movements was lost on me. Might not some unhoped for result come of it? I trembled, too, very unnecessarily, since the true key was in my hands, and no other would open the secret. For 3 long hours, my uncle worked on without a word, without lifting his head, erasing, starting over, erasing again, and so on, more than 100 times. I know very well that if he succeeded in setting down these letters in every possible relative position, the sequence would come out. But I also knew that 20 letters alone could form 2 quintillion, 432 quadrillion, 902 trillion, 8 billion, 176,640,000 combinations. Now, there were 132 letters in this sequence, and these 132 letters would yield a number of different sequences, each made up of at least 133 figures, a number almost impossible to calculate or conceive. So I felt reassured about this heroic method of solving the problem. But time passed. Night came on, street noises ceased. My uncle, bending over his task, noticed nothing. Not even Martha half opening the door. He heard not a sound, not even this noble servant saying, "Will Professor Lindenbach not have any dinner tonight?" Poor Martha. She had to go away unanswered. As for me, after long resistance, I was overcome by sleep, and I fell asleep at one end of the sofa while Uncle Lindenbrock went on calculating and erasing his calculations. When I awoke the next morning, that man was still at his task. His red eyes, his pale complexion, his hair tangled in his feverish hand, the red spots on his cheeks said enough about his desperate struggle with the impossible. And With what weariness of spirit and exhaustion the hours must have passed for him. In truth, I felt sorry for him. In spite of the reproaches which I thought I had a right to make him, a certain feeling of compassion began to take hold of me. The poor man was so entirely taken up with his one idea that he had even forgotten how to get angry. All of his vital forces were concentrated on a single point, and because their usual vent was closed, it was to be feared that their pent-up tension might lead to an explosion at any moment. I could have loosened the steel vise that was crushing his brain with one gesture, just one word, but I did nothing. Yet I was not an ill-natured fellow. Why did I remain silent in this crisis? In my uncle's own interest, of course. No, I repeated. No, I won't speak. He'd insist on going. I know him. Nothing on earth could stop him. He has a volcanic imagination and would risk his life to do what other geologists have never done. I'll keep silent. I'll keep the secret that chance has revealed to me. To reveal it would be to kill Professor Lindenbrock. Let him find it out himself if he can. I don't want to have to reproach myself someday that I led to his destruction. Having made this resolution, I folded my arms and waited. But I had not anticipated a little incident which occurred a few hours later. When the maid Martha wanted to go to the market, she found the door locked. The big key was gone. Who could have taken it out? Assuredly, it was my uncle, when he had returned the night before from his hurried walk. Was this done on purpose? Or was it a mistake? Did he want to expose us to hunger? This seemed like going much too far. Why should Martha and I be the victims of a situation that did not concern us in the least? It was a fact that a few years before this, while my uncle was working on his great classification of minerals, he went for 48 hours without eating, and all of his household was obliged to share in this scientific fast. As for me, what I remember is that I got severe stomach cramps which hardly suited the constitution of a hungry growing lad. Now it seemed to me as if breakfast was going to be lacking, just as dinner had the night before. Yet I resolved to be a hero, and not to be conquered by the pangs of hunger. Martha took it very seriously, and poor woman, she was very much distressed. As for me, the impossibility of leaving the house worried me even more, and for good reason. You understand me? My uncle went on working. His imagination went off rambling into the ideal world of combinations. He lived far away from Earth, and genuinely he was beyond earthly needs. At around noon, hunger began to sting me severely. Martha had, without thinking any harm, cleared out the larder the night before, so that now there was nothing left in the house. Still, I held out. I made it a point of honor. 2:00 struck. This was becoming ridiculous. Worse than that, unbearable. I opened my eyes wide. I began to say to myself that I was exaggerating the importance of the document, that my uncle would surely not believe in it, that he would set it down as a mere puzzle, that if it came to the worst, we would restrain him in spite of himself if he wanted to undertake the adventure, that, after all, he also might just discover the key of the cipher by himself, and then I would have suffered this hunger for nothing. These reasons seemed excellent to me, though on the night before I would have rejected them with indignation. I even found it completely absurd to have waited this long, and I made the decision to say it all. I was looking for a way of bringing up the matter that was not too abrupt when the professor jumped up, put on his hat, and prepared to go out. What? Going out again and locking us in once more? Never. Uncle, I said. He seemed not to hear me. Uncle Lindenbrock? I repeated, saying it more loudly. What? He said, like a man suddenly waking up. Well, the key. What key? The door key? No, I told him. The key to the document. The professor stared at me over his spectacles. No doubt he saw something unusual in me, for he seized my arms and he questioned me with his eyes without being able to say a word. Nonetheless, never was a question more forcibly put to me. I nodded my head up and down. He shook his pityingly, as though he were dealing with a lunatic. I made a more affirmative gesture. His eyes sparkled with live fire, and his hand threatened me. This mute conversation would, under the circumstances, had interested even the most indifferent of spectators, and the truth is that I did not dare speak out any more. So much did I fear that my uncle would smother me in joyful embraces, but he became so urgent, I was at last compelled to answer. Yes, that key, Chance. What are you saying? He shouted. There, read it, I said, giving him the sheet of paper on which I had written. But this doesn't mean anything, he answered, crumpling up the paper. No, I said. Not when you start to read it from the beginning, but from the end. I had not finished my sentence when the professor broke out into a cry, more than a cry, a roar. A new revelation took place in his mind, and he was transfigured. Aha! Ingenious, Sakmussen, he exclaimed. So, you first wrote out your sentence backwards? And throwing himself on the paper, his eyes dimmed and voice choked, he read the entire document from the last letter to the first. It went as follows. In Sneffels Iosicus, Ceratorem cem dilebat, umbra sacratis Juliae intari candelis descende, odus viatur e terrestre centrum attingles cod feci arne Sakmussen. I don't read Latin. Which, in bad Latin, may be translated thusly. Descend into the crater of Sneffels Jokul, which the shadow of Centaurus touches before the Canids of July, bold traveler, and you will reach the center of the earth. I did it. Arne Sakmussen. On reading this, my uncle jumped up as if he had inadvertently touched a Leyden jar. His audacity, his joy, and his conviction were magnificent to see. He came and he went. He gripped his head with both hands. He pushed the chairs out of their places. He piled up his books. Incredible as it may seem, he juggled his precious geodes. He sent a kick there, a thump here. At last his nerves calmed, and like a man exhausted by too great an expenditure of vital power, he sank into his armchair. What time is it? He asked after a few minutes. 3:00, I told him. Really? The dinner has passed quickly. I'm starving. Let's eat. And then... Yes. After dinner, pack my suitcase. What? I said. And yours, replied the merciless professor. And then he entered the dining room. And that is the end of chapter 5. We're going on an adventure after I get a drink. All right, it looks like we are going on an adventure to someplace very warm, I would guess. Anyway, back into it with Chapter 6 of Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. At these words, a cold shiver ran through me. Yet I controlled myself. I even decided to put a good face on it. Scientific arguments alone could have any weight with Professor Lindenbrock. Now, there were good ones against the practicality of such a journey. Go to the center of the earth, what nonsense! But I kept my dialectics in reserve for a suitable opportunity, and I focused on dinner. It is no use to tell of the rage and imprecations of my uncle before the empty table. Explanations were given. Martha was set at liberty, ran off to the market, and did her part so well that an hour afterwards my hunger was appeased and I returned to the gravity of this situation. During dinner, my uncle was almost merry. He indulged in some of those learned jokes which never do anybody any harm. Dessert over, he signaled me to follow him to his study. I obeyed. He sat at one end of his table and I at the other. Axel, he said very mildly, you're a very ingenious lad. You've done me a splendid service at a moment when I, tired of the struggle, was going to abandon the combinations. Where would I have lost myself? Impossible to know. Never, my lad, will I forget it. And you'll have your share in the glory to which your discovery will lead. I thought, he's in a good mood. Now is the time for discussing this glory. Before anything else, my uncle went on, I recommend that you keep absolute secrecy. Do you understand? There are not a few in the scientific world who envy my success, and many would be ready to undertake this enterprise who will only find out about it when we return. Do you really think there are many people bold enough? Certainly! Who would hesitate to acquire such fame? If that document were divulged, a whole army of geologists would be ready to rush to the footsteps of Arne Saknussemm. That's something I'm not convinced of, Uncle, because we have no proof of the authenticity of this document. What? And the book inside which we discovered it? Granted, I said. I admit that Saknussemm may have written these lines, but does it follow that he really carried out such a journey? Couldn't this old parchment be misleading? I almost regretted uttering this last, somewhat daring word. The professor knitted his thick brows, and I feared I had seriously compromised my own safety. Happily, no great harm came of it. A kind of smile sketched itself on the lips of my severe interlocutor, and he said, "That is what we'll see." I said, a bit offended. But allow me to exhaust all the possible objections against the document. Speak up, my boy. Don't be afraid. You're quite at liberty to express your opinions. You are no longer my nephew only, but my colleague. Go ahead. Well, in the first place, I'd like to ask, what are this Jokel, this Snæfell's, and this Scartaris? Names I've never heard before. Nothing's easier. I received a map from my friend Augustus Petermann at Leipzig not long ago. It could not have come at a better time. Take down the third atlas on the second shelf of the large bookcase, Series Z, Plate 4. I rose, and with the help of such precise instructions, I could not fail to find the required atlas. My uncle opened it and said, "Here's one of the best maps of Iceland, that of Henderson, and it'll solve all of our difficulties." I bent over the map. "Look at this volcanic island," said the professor, "and observe that all of them are called jokels. This word, which means glacier in Icelandic, and because of Iceland's high latitude, almost all of the eruptions break through layers of ice. Hence, this term of jokel is applied to all the island's volcanoes." "Very good," I said. "But what of Snæfell's?" I was hoping that this question would be unanswerable, but I was mistaken. My uncle replied, "Follow my finger along the west coast of Iceland. Do you see Reykjavik, the capital? Yes, good. Go up the innumerable fjords on those shores eaten away by the sea, and stop just under 65 degrees latitude. What do you see there?" "A kind of peninsula looking like a bare bone, with an enormous kneecap at the end." "Fair comparison, my boy. Now, do you see anything on that kneecap?" "Yes, a mountain that seems to have grown out of the sea." "Right. That's Snæfell's." "Snæfell's?" "It is. It is a mountain of 5,000 feet, one of the most remarkable ones on the island, and certainly the most famous one in the whole world if its crater leads down to the center of the earth." "But that's impossible!" I exclaimed, shrugging my shoulders and put off by such a ridiculous assumption. "Impossible?" said the professor. "Why?" "Because the crater is obviously filled with lava and burning rocks, and therefore—" "But suppose it's an extinct volcano." "Extinct?" "Yes, the number of active volcanoes on the surface of the globe is currently only about 300, but there is a much larger quantity of extinct ones. Now, Snæfell's is one of these, and since historic times it's only had one eruption, back in 1219. From that time on, it has quieted down more and more, and now it is no longer counted among active volcanoes." To such definitive statements, I could make no reply. I therefore took refuge in other dark passages of the document. "What's the meaning of this word Scartaris, and what have the Calids of July to do with it?" My uncle stopped to think for a few minutes. I had a moment of hope, but only one, because he soon answered me as follows. "What is darkness to you is light to me. This proves the ingenious care which Saknussemm wanted to indicate his discovery. Snæfell's has several craters, so it was necessary to point out which one leads to the center of the globe. What did the Icelandic scholar do? He observed that at the approach of the Calids of July, that's to say, in the last days of June, one of the peaks, called Scartaris, throws its shadow down the mouth of that particular crater, and he committed that fact to his document. Could there possibly have been a more exact guide? As soon as we arrive at the summit of Snæfell's, we will have no hesitation as to the proper road to take." Decidedly, my uncle had answered every one of my objections. I saw that his position on the old parchment was impregnable. I therefore ceased to press him on that part of the subject, and as above all things had to be convinced, I passed on to scientific objections, in which my opinion I decided were far more serious. "Well then," I said, I'm forced to agree that Sakmusen's sentence is clear and leaves no room for doubt. I even admit that the document looks perfectly authentic. That learned scholar did go to the bottom of Snæfell's. He saw the shadow of Scartaris touch the edge of the crater before Kalends of July. He even heard the legendary stories of his time about the crater leading to the center of the world, but when he reached it himself, as for carrying out the journey and returning, if he ever went, no, I say 100 times no. And your reason, my uncle said in an especially mocking tone of voice. My reason is that all theories of science demonstrate that such a feat is impossible. All the theories say that, do they? Said the professor in a jovial tone. Oh, evil theories! How will they bother us, these poor theories? I saw that he was mocking me, but I continued all the same. Yes, I told him. It's perfectly well known that the interior temperature rises 1 degree for every 70 feet in depth. Now, if this proportion is to be constant and the radius of the Earth is 1,500 leagues, the temperature at the core must be more than 200,000 degrees Celsius. Therefore, all the substances in the interior of the Earth are in a state of incandescent gas because the metals, gold, platinum, the hardest rocks, can't resist that heat. So, I have the right to ask whether it's possible to enter into such an environment. So, Axel, it's the heat that bothers you? Of course it is. If we reach a depth of only 10 leagues, we'll have arrived at the limit of the terrestrial crust, for there the temperature will be more than 1,300 degrees Celsius. And you're afraid of melting? I'll leave it up to you to decide that question, I told him rather sullenly. This is my decision, said Professor Lindenbrock, putting on one of his grandest airs. Neither you nor anybody else knows with any certainty what is going on in the interior of this globe, since not the 12,000th part of its radius is known. Science is eminently perfectible, and every theory is constantly put in question by a newer one. Wasn't it believed until Fourier that the temperature of the interplanetary spaces was constantly decreasing? And don't we know today that the greatest cold of the ethereal regions never goes below 40 or 50 Celsius below zero? Why wouldn't it be the same with the interior heat? Why wouldn't it, at a certain depth, reach an upper limit instead of raising to the point where it melts the most resistant metals? Since my uncle was now moving the question to the terrain of theory, I had no answer. Well, I'll tell you that true scholars, amongst them Poisson, have demonstrated that a heat of 200,000 degrees Celsius existed in the interior of the globe, and the white-hot gases from the molten matter would then expand so much that the crust of the Earth couldn't resist, and it would explode. That's Poisson's opinion, Uncle. Nothing more. True, he said. But other distinguished geologists also hold the opinion that the interior of the globe is neither gas nor water, nor any of the heaviest minerals known, for in that case the Earth would weigh less than it currently does. With numbers you can prove anything, I told him. But is it the same with facts, my boy? Is it not known that the number of volcanoes has considerably diminished since the first days of creation? And if there is heat at the core, can we not therefore conclude that the heat is decreasing? Uncle, if you enter into the domain of speculation, I have nothing further to discuss with you. But I have to tell you that my opinion is supported by those of very competent people. Do you remember a visit to the celebrated chemist Humphrey Davy when he visited me in 1825? No, I wasn't even born for 19 more years. Well, Humphrey Davy did call on me on his way through Hamburg. We discussed for a long time, among other problems, the theory of the liquidity of the Earth's inner core. We agreed that it couldn't be liquid, and for a reason which science has never been able to refute. What reason? I said, a bit astonished. Because this liquid mass would be subject, like the ocean, to the attraction of the moon, and therefore there would be interior tides twice a day that would push up the terrestrial crust and cause periodic earthquakes. But it's evidence that the surface of the globe has been subject to combustion, I told him, and it's quite reasonable to suppose that the external crust cooled first, while the heat gathered in the center. It's a mistake, said my uncle. The Earth has been heated by combustion on its surface, not the other way around. Its surface was composed of a great number of metals, such as potassium and sodium, which have the property of igniting at contact with air and water. These metals kindled when the atmospheric steam fell on the soil as rain, and by, when the waters penetrated into the fissures of the Earth's crust. They caused more fires with explosions and eruptions. Hence the numerous volcanoes during the first ages of the Earth. What an ingenious theory, I exclaimed, in spite of myself. Which Humphrey Davy demonstrated to me by a simple experiment. He made a ball of the metals that I've mentioned, which was a very fair representation of our globe. Whenever he made a fine dew fall on its surface, it swelled up, oxidized, and formed a little hill. A crater opened at the summit. The eruption took place and spread such heat to the entire ball that it became quite impossible to hold it in one hand. In truth, I was beginning to be shaken by the professor's arguments. Besides, he proposed them with his usual passion and enthusiasm. You see, Axel, he added, the condition of the nucleus has given rise to various theories among geologists. There's no proof at all for this interior heat. My opinion is that there is no such thing. There cannot be, at any rate. We'll see for ourselves, and like Arne Sakmussen, we will know exactly what the fact of the matter is concerning this grand question. Very well, we'll see, I told him, warming up a bit to his enthusiasm. Yes, we'll see. That is, if it's possible to see anything there. And why wouldn't we be able to see? Can we not depend on the electric phenomena to give us light, and even on the atmosphere, which might indeed become luminous due to its pressure as we approach the middle? Yes, I said, and then again, yes, that is possible, after all. It's certain, said my uncle, in a tone of triumph. But silence, you hear me? Silence on the whole subject, so that no one gets the idea of discovering the center of the Earth before we do. And that is the end of chapter 6. Oh, honestly, for the 1800s, I'm sure that science seemed sound. I don't know that I'm learned enough to actually refute any of it, except I don't believe that you would get cooler in the middle of the Earth. And honestly, I don't think that volcano numbers have gone down since the beginning of time. I think they just come and go in waves. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you're enjoying this romp as much as I am. This book is a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I hope they don't make poor Martha go with them. I get the feeling that the professor might make poor Martha go with them. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you as always for listening. I hope that you enjoyed those 2 chapters, and I will see you next time.